Hello students, I want to talk a little bit about how to research for your comparative study. This could also work for how to research for your EE if you're doing something in art. So you want to start by asking good questions to kind of guide your research. That's because if you just kind of start researching, there's not often a lot that you'll glean unless you are more directed. And so when you're asking good questions, part of that is to understand the different levels of questions you can ask. And so there's something called Bloom's taxonomy that kind of goes from higher level thinking to low level thinking. It starts with knowledge, then it goes to comprehension, then it goes up to application, next is analysis, synthesis, and then finally evaluation. These are good questions. These are good ways to kind of build your questions. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how you might structure some questions to lead your research based on Bloom's taxonomy for the artist Marc Chagall. So the basic stuff that you're going to need to start with is just so that you can increase your own comprehension and your knowledge. So what genre does Chagall usually get categorized into? That's very basic. It's just telling you some like small chunks of information that you can probably answer in one or two words, maybe a sentence or two. Doesn't require a lot of thinking. It's just basic knowledge. It's almost like memorization. What genre does Chagall usually get categorized into? Maybe how much of Chagall's work uses arbitrary color. Now I like this question because yes, it is a quote-unquote low-level thinking. It's just how much, right? Like half, a quarter, 3/4, most. It's an easy one-word answer, but arbitrary color is a art term, and that's really good. You're starting to use relevant vocabulary. So getting a little bit higher into the application comprehension range, you're looking at questions like, why does Chagall's work have animals so often? How does he have so much? Why does he have so much color? Or how is it symbolic? Is it symbolic? And that's kind of a question that pushes back against the arbitrary color, because if it's arbitrary, it means it doesn't mean anything. It isn't meant to represent an emotion or a feeling, nor is it meant to represent the object. It's just kind of a random color chosen, quote-unquote, arbitrarily. So again, application, comprehension question, why does Chagall's work often have depiction of animals, and how is his use of color symbolic, or is it? So moving on more into the analysis section, you might talk about the influences of Chagall. So how is he influenced by the Cubists or the Fauvists or the Expressionists, and then which ones would be an interesting question. You might also talk about how he deals with specific themes from his culture and from his experience. So he was a Russian Jew who left Russia largely because he was pushed out, and he moved to Paris. And so, of course, Russia, Jewish, and Paris is all going to kind of factor in. And so are there common symbols from those places that manifest in his artworks? All right. After that, you've got kind of a synthesis, and this one may not always be a kind of research that you're used to doing for a research paper. It might actually be something that you try to do as something like, what kind of artwork could I make? Or would I make that follows the style and the themes of Marc Chagall? Again, this isn't the research that you're necessarily going to put into a research paper, but it's the kind of research that's going to improve your ability and make you understand Chagall more deeply. And so if you can do something, so synthesis is to like create something. If you can do something based on your research becomes deeper. Then finally, the evaluation question is going to be mostly the same for everybody, and that will be something along the lines of, to what extent is the artist's work a product of his or her culture? And in the case of Marc Chagall, you've got a number of things that could be his culture. So of course, I've already mentioned that he was Russian, he was Jewish, and he moved to France. He also lived some time in America. And then think about the things around him. So in France at the time, it was fairly Catholic, and he did a number of Christian artworks. Also consider the different art movements that were a part of his culture, and what did they say about art, what did they value, and that should help you explain and answer the question, to what extent is the artist's work a product of his or her culture? Okay, so that's kind of the first thing about asking questions and having them guide you. Now, when it comes to where to get the resources, how to do the research, that'll be slightly different, obviously. So when you're looking at research and you're trying to do good research, get good resources, and you need to start general because you need to build up your knowledge base. A lot of times art Journals are kind of fluffy language, or they use bigger words than they necessarily need to. It's just the way that art is written about and discussed in academia. So if you'll start general, you'll get a better understanding. So start with art history books. Gardner's and Stokestad's are two very, very common ones. Go to other encyclopedias. Even Wikipedia can give you some information. And then major museum websites like the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Tate Modern or and the British Museum. Any major museum is going to have some good information, and they're pretty reliable sources as well. So their websites are reliable. They often have YouTube channels if you just kind of want to peruse and have it playing in the background while you do something else to kind of give you like light level research. And then one of my favorites is smarthistory.org. Smart History, or maybe it's .com. I think it's .com. You should look that up. But Smart History has two art professors. Sometimes they have some guests on, and they discuss artworks at length. And they're really good for art movements, for artists themselves, and for artworks. One more that I didn't put on the video here is The Art Assignment by PBS Studios out of the United States. It's, again, kind of hit and miss, but if they have something relevant to your artist, it's very helpful. Once you've got a good knowledge base built up, you should use these sources to find other more specific sources. So we're talking about journals like Ceramics Monthly, Juxtapose, Art in America, etc. There's tons more. Once you have those sources, you can find them on Google Scholar, JSTOR, or EBSCO. You should be able to find those here at school through the Ask a Librarian what kinds of online resources we have to find journals. And then if you're using something, if you're using an artwork that's more contemporary, if it's like current, as in made this year, last year, 2 years ago, what have you, you might consider just emailing the artist or DMing the artist via Instagram if they have a popular Instagram. You can often find their interviews with them with artists themselves or with curators discussing the artworks and the artists that you're researching in periodicals and journals and magazines, but also on YouTube. So again, check that, because if you have the artist, him or herself, actually speaking, that's a really great resource. And then finally, there was a time period in the art world where artists made a lot of manifestos, and they said, well, this is what surrealist art is, this is what cubist art is, and that will give you some good context for what is the kind of the cultural significance of the artworks, or maybe not the cultural significance, but it will give you good context for what other people thought art should be and do during their time period. And that will probably lead more to cultural significance, but some of that, of course, could spill over into function and purpose. So hopefully that is helpful for you. Hopefully you're able to get some more information this time, and maybe that clarifies some things. If you didn't get some of that, look back through the video, check out those resources. Of course, you can always go back to this page here, and this has a lot of information to kind of help you guide what kinds of questions you should be asking to build up your information and your research for both cultural significance and function and purpose.